Good afternoon. It is 1 o'clock. It's March 9th, 2022. My name is Mark Johnson. I'm a member of the Alaska Royalty Oil and Gas Development Advisory Board and have been designated chair. I'm here at the offices of the Division of Oil and Gas on the 11th floor of the Atwood Building in Anchorage. This is a scheduled public meeting of the board. We met last week pursuant to a public notice. That public notice also gave notice of this meeting. I guess I'd start for the benefit of people, to make sure I get everybody identified. Let's start in the room and go around the table and have folks here in the room identify themselves, and then we'll go online.
My name is Chalinda Veerasinghe. I go by CD. I'm a commercial analyst with the Division of Oil and Gas.
I'm Johnny Meza, commercial analyst at the Division of Oil and Gas.
Colleen Glover, Tax Division Director, Department of Revenue, and delegate for the Revenue Commissioner.
Adi Chobal, Commercial Analyst, Division of Oil and Gas.
Okay, and then I'm just going to go on the screen. I have Board Member Ted Leonard is signed on to the meeting. Commissioner Julie Sandy of the Department of Commerce and Economic Developments. I think that there's more than that. The Department of Commerce, Community, I don't know, I'll get that messed up.
You got it. Commerce, Community, and Economic Development. You got it.
Yes. We have Ms. Feenstra from the Department of Law. We have David Eisenberg, member of the board, with us via the video link. Mr. Tom Walsh, member of the board. Mr. Ryan Fitzpatrick of Department of Natural Resources, and then reporting from 197-252-7800 is Martin Anderson, a board member. Is there anyone else on the call that has not been identified? If not, I would note that a quorum of the board is present and we are ready to do business. We've had a meeting last week where we made an effort to entertain any questions that members of the board might have to staff. There were several questions posed. The answers were made a matter of, the questions were made a matter of record, and then the answers were made a matter of record that were recorded at that time. There was one public participant that made a few comments. The question I now have for staff is, have there been any other questions posed by members of the board that required an answer of staff in connection to the two proposed dispositions of royalty oil?
No, Chuck, no more questions.
Have there been any other public comments that may have arrived since our last meeting?
No.
Okay. With that, and in accordance with our stated intention from the last meeting, I would like to entertain a motion to close the record as it relates to the board's consideration of the two previously identified royalty oil contracts. One is with Petrostar and the other one is with Marathon Petroleum. Is a board member willing to make such a motion?
Yeah, so moved.
I have a move by Mr. Eisenberg and seconded by Mr. Walsh. Is there any discussion on the motion to close the record on these two contracts? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Is there anyone opposed to the motion to close the record? If not, then the record is closed, and what this amounts to is that all the material we've been presented with, all the discussion we've had is now constitutes the official record as it relates to consideration of these two contracts. And that's the way it should be. I think we've got a clean record at this point. At this stage of the game, and I guess I'd like to turn to staff, Mr. Meza. Just preliminarily, there was a variety of documents distributed to board members earlier in the week or late last week, Monday. I've had an opportunity to look at those. I think of perhaps greatest significance is that in and amongst the documents distributed is a proposed, and it's a draft, it's an example of a report that would be adopted by this board to the Alaska legislature as it relates to each of these two contracts. We may choose to combine the two contracts in the report. I'm not sure about that. However, there's also a proposed resolution form that was made available to folks. And I do believe that it is most important that we have two distinct resolutions adopted by the board, should that be our will. One that addresses the Marathon contract and the other that addresses the Petrostar. These contracts must rise and fall on their own merits when considered by the legislature. They're not, to my knowledge, particularly related to one another. And so we do need to have, as it particularly relates to the resolutions, two distinct resolutions. And we may have some more discussion about whether or not we can get by with a single recommendation or report. But with that background, I'd like to turn to Mr. Meza and see what else he has to tell us about the status of documents that would hopefully will be prepared or have been prepared that relate to these two contracts.
Thank you, Chair. So the two documents that you identified, one of them being the report to the legislature and another one being the resolution by the royalty board. Those were samples from 2016. Back then, there was a contract with Petrostar, a multi-year contract, and those were provided as a guidance for the consideration of the royalty board should they decide to vote on these proposed contracts in a favorable way. These documents identify the opinions of the members of the royalty board back then, and the department will certainly could help facilitating any sort of administrative work towards that, but those were provided with that objective to give some example and guidance as to what we were looking for in terms of going to our next step, which is engaging with the legislature.
Just so I have a quick question. What would be the department's recommendation or suggestion as it relates to the report? Do we need to have two reports or one?
I would like to, if the board is okay, I would like to reach out to our Department of Law. My instinct, my take is that it would have its own document.
Ms. Feenstra, with the Department of Law, did you hear the question, and are you prepared to maybe offer an opinion about that?
I did hear, and I think that Mr. Meza is right. I think that there should be a report for each contract, but I will browse the statute and regulation and see if there's anything that specifically requires that.
But it sounds like, to be safe, we should have two.
I think so. That's my opinion.
I think that's good advice as well. I would urge that we go down that path. With this as background, once again, we just closed the record. The board is in a position where if it wishes to make a recommendation regarding contracts, we can do that now. I guess there's probably two ways to break that out. Just trying to get this organized. I think what I'd like to do is entertain, and for purposes of discussion, a motion that the board instruct the staff to draft two distinct documents that would basically reflect what occurred back in 2016 in terms of a report to the Alaska legislature. So the exact particulars related to each of the contracts and each of these two distinct reports would be updated and changed from the document that was adopted in 2016. But by and large, the content of those reports would be the same. So if we were to hear a motion and adopt a motion to do so, that would instruct the staff to prepare those documents. And in as much that's largely a ministerial task, we could make that decision. We could do that today. There would not be a requirement that we meet again to formally adopt the report, because the instructions to the staff would be to conform our action of today to the same format as what had occurred in 2016. So I guess what I'd like to do at this point, I would like to entertain a motion to instruct the staff to prepare a document for each of the contracts that would constitute a report to the legislature relative to these contracts. And of course, implicit in that is a decision on the part of this board that we are going to be recommending to the legislature that the contracts be approved. So for purpose of discussion, is a board member willing to make that motion?
I would, Chair. Ted Leonard.
Thank you, Ted. And is there a second?
Second.
I have Ms. Glover who seconded the motion, but thank you for that. That puts the motion before us. Is there discussion on the part of the board members relative to the effect of the motion?
Can I ask a question?
Ms. Glover, please.
I guess, not sure if the folks from DNR were here at the time, and just whether the report that went to the legislature in 2016, were there questions, or did they ask information or provide any guidance of other information that they might have wanted to see in the report? Just like if there's it seems like we should add that.
Right. So this is John Mesa. I'm not sure precisely what kind of questions there were on the report. I know that the legislature back then was interested in the deliberation that the royalty board did at that time for the contract. And that was also part of the hearings that DNR provided to the different committees. So I would say in general, yes. But at this point, I don't remember any specific questions related to the content of the report.
So just to follow up on that question, to put a finer point on it, you're not aware of anything that was particularly problematic that emerged from the legislative questioning and hearings, are you?
Not that I can recall.
Okay. Other discussion relative to the motion before us? This is kind of the key to what we do here. It's sort of a big moment. I assume that everybody has had their questions answered relative to these two proposed contracts. I personally find the best interest findings to be fascinating reading. Although I have to admit that it's important to have a good attention span to get through it. But if you look at these things, they're impressive documents. The analysis of the methodology that's used is pretty impressive. Can I predict, will the legislature have some questions? We don't know. I don't know. We're gonna do as best we can to respond to the legislature. But in a lot of ways, that'd be a good result if we get some good hard questions, and we can go through the process and describe why these two contracts made sense, why they comply with the statute. I think that'd be a good thing. I'm personally, I intend to vote in favor of the motion. I think it's an appropriate thing to do, as we've had a good discussion in recent months about the necessity of getting this board to act and then to forward a recommendation to the legislature. There is a fairly tight timeline that we're dealing with. I guess I would ask those are remarks. Are there people that have other comments or any sort of questions or inquiry relative to these contracts and the proposed reports and recommendation before we would vote? This is your chance, folks.
Okay, this is
Ms. Glover.
Colleen Glover. Just I mean, we're gonna delegate DNR to update these documents. Is there gonna be an opportunity to review them? I mean, some things are different, obviously, like the state's fiscal condition is very different than it was. Are we gonna be able to see them again, or they're gonna draft and give it to the legislature?
Oh, good question, but let's just stop and break that apart. They're gonna draft.
Okay,
The question then becomes, does this board want to see them again before we move on and take further action on them? I guess, Mr. Mesa, do you have comments on that? Let's hear from you on that.
Yes, definitely. It is not our place to put language that you are not comfortable with. So the way we see it, it is a draft that will be subject to the board's review and feedback until the board is satisfied with the content of the report, and from there we can proceed.
So what we could do is that we could with the adoption of the motion, DNR could go off and update the recommendation, the report. It could be distributed to us for our examination. And that, I guess we would be in a posture that, absent objection to some component of it, by a date certain, DNR would be authorized to move forward with it. But if there was a board member that had a problem with the recommendation, the report, we could reconvene and discuss that again. Is that, I'll ask the members, is that seem to be an appropriate way to move forward?
It does.
have it. Go ahead, Mr.
No, I'm
Walsh.
saying, this is David Eisenberg. That does sound like an appropriate method of moving forward. The only question I would have is, if a board member has a question, a concern, a recommendation, is this handled through an email flow? And if so, when do we call it done? Right, because we got a fairly tight time frame to work under.
Right. So just let me break that apart. There's kind of two issues there. One, Johnny, what kind of time frame are we dealing with here at this point?
So the next steps is, should the board decide to act favorably on these contracts, we plan to engage the legislature by submitting a bill. But we cannot do that without a report and resolution by the board.
Okay, but is there a target time for doing that?
Yes, it's the week of the 21st at the latest.
Okay,
Of March.
March, yes.
so that reflects the outside of our time frame to act. So we've got
Yes.
potentially days to address this kind of problem. The other part, since although we're deliberating in public, on this, we're on the record right now. I guess the question, as it relates to this email train, and this goes to Ms. Feenstra at the Department of Law again, would email traffic that expressed concerns or made recommendations, and this is a part of the deliberation of the board, is that going to be a public document? How would you define that document?
I don't think that the deliberations as you're going back and forth would be public. Give me just a minute to double check that though.
Okay. I'll just say that I'm perfectly happy to do whatever you tell us to do. So just get the right answer. I'm certainly happy to do that. People should know how that's going to be handled before we start generating potentially some email traffic. This, I'm going to let you work on that to continue, but I'd like to continue to hear from board members about any comments relative to the process or anything that should go into our consideration before acting on this motion. Are there any other comments that board members might have?
Mr. Chair, this is Mr. Walsh.
Yes, sir.
I would just like to say that I agree with your approach to the reports. I would also like to say that this experience has been my first experience in actually working with the board, although I've been on the board for several years. And I just want to say that I'm very impressed with how robust and deliberate the process is. I have tremendous respect for the staff that has put all this together, and I'm very impressed. I'm very happy with the outcome, and I just wanted to get that on the record.
Thank you. I guess I would offer my kind of tagline comment that when I get presented with these issues, that we had to potentially take action on these two contracts, my whole focus has been trying to make sure that we don't screw it up. Because obviously there's a fair amount of money involved. I know the contracts are important for the parties, important for the state, important for the economy of the state. So I've been trying to hopefully get it right from the outset. Any other comments?
And this is Emily Feenster again. I don't see any requirement that would mean those emails need to be open to the public. Anything submitted to the board or considered by the board is public, and any meetings are public, but I can't find a reason within that the emails would be open to the public.
Okay, thank you. So if people have concerns relative to the draft report that staff is going to prepare, they can go ahead and submit those via email. I would request that if you have those, it would be beneficial for the board members to know what's being said. So those will be distributed amongst the board members. I do think that's an important element. What else I'm going to say, we have about 10 days to work with. I'm going to, I guess, exercise a little bit of discretion and indicate that, actually, first a question to staff. When do you think you might be able to present the board with a draft report?
I would say we can have it by tomorrow.
Okay. Today is Wednesday. I would propose, and I guess I'm looking for a number to count on my fingers, that people, if they have concerns or comments relative to the draft report and recommendation, that people file those by noon on Monday. So that's the date that we'll deal with, and that will give the staff some additional days to pull everything together in a final form and move forward. So just to note, we have in front of us a motion to instruct the staff to adopt the report. Part and parcel with that, and to really back up the report, are resolutions that we will need to execute, and those were distributed. The 2016 variety was shown to people. I believe that the resolution is entirely consistent with the report and recommendation, and staff would be under instruction to develop two resolutions that are totally consistent with the report that would be adopted by this group. So I'm going to, absent objection, I'm going to treat the resolutions as part of the report. So there's no need to make an additional, take additional action. We have one motion before us to instruct the staff relative to the reports. And then at the same time, that will include the preparation of resolutions that would be sent to the legislature. Just a note, if you've had a quick look at those resolutions, they do call for members of the board to individually sign the resolutions. I've been informed by staff that we have the ability to have folks execute those electronically. So that will be something everybody will need to attend to when we get those documents in front of us. So with that, there's the plan. We're going to, staff is going to prepare the drafts for us. They'll distribute it to us. We will hear back from people by noon on Monday. At that point, we'll make a determination as to whether or not there's any need to further meet and discuss and deliberate on these contracts. Absent that, we will proceed to finalize the report and the two resolutions, and they will be distributed to the members of the board for execution. So you have an opportunity until noon on Monday to comment on the reports. So after that, you'll have to forever hold your peace. So I'll monitor the situation noon on Monday. I'll send out an email at the close of business on Monday, whether or not we've received any other information. And we'll hear from me at the close of business on Monday. So that's the pathway that we've laid out under this, the motion that's on the floor right now. Are there any further comments before we move to a vote on the motion? Ms. Glover, and then Mr. Eisenberg.
Yes.
Only trying to anticipate the legislature and what they'd be interested in, and we're in this unique situation right now with kind of skyrocketing oil prices, that maybe something to that gets added to the report to say, you know, we discussed it at our last meeting, and still, you know, the contract is still good, and, you know, higher and lower oil prices. I just think that might be a thing that they'll focus on.
I would agree on that. Let's, we don't need to go around on that, but I think before I go to that, David, you had a comment before.
Just a question, actually. Is the signing process going to be via DocuSign or something similar to that? Okay.
Yes, that's my understanding. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Just responding to Ms. Glover, yes, I think adding at least a couple of sentences that describes our efforts to try to identify the effect of the volatility and the increase in oil prices would be good. The legislature needs to know that we thought about it.
Right, that's my point. So they don't question Johnny or whoever is presenting to say the board did discuss it and consider it, and yeah.
Okay, so the staff is nodding their head, and we believe that there's going to be some language added that reflects that. Any other comments?
This is Commissioner Sandy. I just, to that point, and thank you, Colleen, for bringing it up. It was the one resounding question that kept coming in my head. But perhaps Mr. Mezek in that could consider addressing whether or not the escalating prices of oil and the change in the global scenario since the time, and I completely agree with you. I appreciate the best interest findings documents. I find them fascinating. But in Mr. Mez's presentation of information, perhaps in that he could include some consideration of whether or not more than this small group of companies would have been interested parties. That was one thought that I had, and that, you know, I understood the limited interested parties as part of what we use to use the process that we use in terms of waiving competitive bidding and all of that. So if that is something staff could be prepared to address, I would appreciate that too.
I see Mr. Mesa nodding his head up and down. So thank you for that point as well. And we will do that. Any other comments or suggestions? If not, and hearing none, I guess that would bring us to the point where I will ask all those in favor of adoption of the motion as made and as explained, and the process as laid out relative to these two contracts. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Anyone voting no? I hear none. And with that, the motion is approved. In general, since we've addressed the report, we've included the resolutions. That I believe brings us to the end of our business for the day. It's fairly momentous, but it's what you got to do. Is there does any board member have Well, let me ask Mr. Actually, go to staff first. Is there anything else that the staff is aware of that requires action or consideration by the board here today?
No, I believe that the voting on your decisions on the contracts is the main event of today.
Okay, and we've obviously laid out a process and a timeline for getting it all done. So that's going to be happening. Any comments from the board?
This is Commissioner Sandy. I just wanted to echo again, I appreciate all the work of the staff and I very much appreciate the best interest finding documents and all the other documents that were included. They were helpful to me. Thank you.
And Chair, this is Ted Leonard. Again, I want to
Yes, sir.
thank the staff, but also want to thank you, Chair, for your leadership in doing this in such a way that we took the right steps. So I also appreciate your leadership in that too, Chair.
Thank you, Ted. I appreciate that. Other comments?
Yes, David here. Want to just
Yes.
echo those same comments. And at the appropriate time, I have a question about future work for the board. I don't know if this is an appropriate time or not.
Actually, I think it is the appropriate time.
Okay. So as we've previously discussed, under statute, there are further requirements of this board beyond, approving elements such as this. And I don't have the statute in front of me, but putting together a plan, as I recall, is a part of that and something that we should plan to address.
Yep. I should, for the benefit of everybody, everybody should know that David and I have discussed this, and I'm pretty sure I can dig out the reference pretty quickly myself. But with the concurrence of David, I will exchange with the board, or excuse me, with the staff on how we can best move forward to discharge our responsibilities in that way, and we can address those, and we'll be in touch.
Very good.
But just to reiterate, David and I have discussed, there are some components either in the statute or in the regulation that ask that we do some other things. And I take those kind of responsibilities seriously. So anyway, we will discuss those and we'll be back in communication with the board when we have an answer and a plan to move forward. Ms. Glover.
Very interesting. I'm reading the statute, but I think, when we talk about this in the future, just knowing if this ever occurred in the past, like if the prior board ever developed this plan would be helpful information. But I point on here about public fiscal stability, and what I like about these contracts being longer term than the recent 1 year. I think, refineries and in-state supply. And so I think, these two kind of, contracts we're discussing are kind of fit in to what kind of that kind of requirement.
Right. So I think it's fairly clear that the discussion we have, Mr. Mesa, is going to be a little broader. We're going to be moving beyond, obviously, these contracts and looking at a little more broadly at some issues. So we're going to try to do our best to come up with a good plan. Anything further on that, David?
No, thank you, Chair.
Any comment from Mr. Anderson or Mr. Walsh?
No further comments from me, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Mr. Anderson?
No further comments, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think we've covered maybe what our next plan is. We've taken action that's required. Before we adjourn, are there any final comments? I have none other than to say it's been an interesting process, and if anything, I've learned a lot of things I didn't know before in terms of how the methodology works, and I think in terms of valuing our contracts, and that's a whole fascinating study, as I indicated earlier. So I appreciate the work in a big way. Any other comments at all?
We have to approve the contracts?
Excuse me?
Do we have to approve the contracts?
Oh, we've adopting a recommendation.
Right.
I don't believe we have to, the contracts, the approval of the contracts rests with the legislature. We are making a recommendation to the legislature that the contracts be approved.
Okay.
So your question is, that question is subsumed into the report we
Okay.
make.
Okay.
And just, I had a similar question on that, because more on the formality or process side rather than the decision in itself. Just that, and this is obviously depending on how the board feels about it. Back in 2016, there was a roll call, if you will, and a decision by each of the members into the record about their recommendation. But that is just a reflection of what happened in 2016.
We have the ability, of course, ultimately, each of the board members is being asked to execute the resolutions.
Yes.
So, if we haven't heard from you before now, I suppose a person could decline to sign, or they could file a dissenting statement. But I believe the action we've taken is implicitly saying and recommending to the legislature that the contracts be approved. We don't sign the contracts.
Right.
Only the commissioner of DNR is going to sign the contract. So that's approval. And then the legislature has made her execution contingent on their action, is the way I would interpret that. So with that, I think our actions on these contracts are complete, assuming we don't get a problem with the report.
Mhm.
Are there any questions on that?
Yes, Chair. This is David Eisenberg. I'm
Okay.
just, again, thinking through the overall process. Might a roll call vote be appropriate in the unlikely circumstance that one of our members is unavailable or fails to sign when the documents are distributed, so that
Yep,
we have that person's concurrence?
I'm amenable to that. We could, we can make that a matter of record. I'm totally amenable to that. I've got the roster here in front of me and I'm prepared to call the roll. Can I interpret your comment, David, as a request for a roll call?
Yes, please.
Vote on the
Yes,
part of the
please.
members, as to whether or not, and there'll be two questions I'll put to each member, and that is whether or not they would move to, they're going to vote to approve the PetroStar contract. And then the second one is whether or not they're going to vote to approve the Marathon, or recommend approval of the Marathon contract. So those two questions, without objection, I'm going to call the roll, and we'll do that. Mr. Martin Anderson, what is your vote on recommending approval of the PetroStar contract?
That's yes.
And your vote as it relates to recommending approval of the Marathon contract?
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Sandy, what is your vote relative to approval of the PetroStar contract?
Yes.
And as to the Marathon contract?
Yes.
Mr. Eisenberg, what is your vote relative to recommending approval of the PetroStar contract?
Yes.
And the Marathon contract?
Yes.
I don't believe she's with us. Commissioner Feige is a non-voting member, so I will not ask for her votes, and she's not with us today. Ms. Glover, your vote relative to recommending approval of the PetroStar contract
Yes.
and to the Marathon contract?
Yes.
Good. I will call myself last. Mr. Leonard, what is your vote relative to recommending approval of the PetroStar contract
Yes.
and Marathon?
Yes.
Mr. Walsh, what is your vote relative to recommending approval of the PetroStar contract
Yes.
and Marathon contract?
Yes.
And I vote yes as to both contracts. So the vote is unanimous as to both, and I'm happy that we put that on the record, in case there's any question. With that, I'm not aware of anything else we need to do. And I'd ask for anybody who has any additional final comments before we adjourn?
I just have one.
Mr. Mesa, last comment.
Thank you. First of all, to thank everybody for their work, and just want to make sure we address if there's anybody from the public, which seems there aren't.
I guess on the record, I will ask if there's any member of the public that might be signed on to this meeting that has any comment whatsoever relative to our activities here today.
Doesn't look like.
I hear none and I see none, so I assume that there are none. Okay. Although the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
By Mr.
Second.
Walsh, by Mr. Eisenberg. All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, and with none, that motion carries and we are adjourned. Thank you, folks.